All right, we're live. What is up, everyone? Roy here. You're listening to Clemenz with a Z podcast. Got another segment here in the We Were in a Cult, where I talk to former members of the ICOC to try to make sense of this wild thing we were in, trying to get to the bottom of some things. And for this episode, I got Anabel with us. Hey, Anabel.
Hi,
Glad to have you on.
excited to be here.
Oh, yeah, it's great. So, as always, how'd you get involved in this church?
So, I guess I would be considered a kingdom kid.
Hmm?
Um, my parents were met when they were probably 28 years old. Actually a little bit younger than that. They say that they were walking in their neighborhood, and my brother and I were horrible sleepers, and they ran into some neighbors, and the neighbors were like, "Oh, we noticed your kids are a little out of control. We can help you with that." You should come out to our Bible talk and we can teach you how to be parents. I mean, really, it's kind of like not in
That's
so many ways, but my dad said that they were really drawn, like they were young, they didn't really know a lot of people. And this couple that was a little bit older than them basically offered them this place where they could learn how to be parents and love God. And so they went to the Bible talk and they got baptized. And that was in Orlando. And after that, they moved up to Atlanta, and we got involved in the Atlanta church for a while.
mhm.
But my dad, they couldn't do the full tithe. And so they were asked to leave. And so there was a little period where they weren't a part of it, but ended up getting plugged back in by the time I was in elementary school. So,
What do you mean they couldn't do the full tithe?
so because my parents again were 28, there were 5 kids. My dad was the only one working, and I know like the Bible talks about giving 10% of your income, and my parents were just not in a place where they could financially do that. And so the church talked to my dad about it, and when he was basically like, "Hey, we're already eating pancakes every night and unable to give a full tithe," the church let them know that they weren't serious members and they were asked to leave. Yeah,
And was this in Orlando or Atlanta?
it was in Atlanta.
Okay.
So after that, my dad took a job in Jacksonville, and they, ironically, the people that met them in Orlando had moved to Jacksonville
Hmm.
and started studying the Bible with my aunt and uncle. And then my parents got plugged back into the church. My dad got rebaptized, and we spent a couple years in Jacksonville, and my dad was able to come back. Things were a lot different for him, and they got plugged into the ministry there.
What a wild thing. I'd love to interview and talk about he had to get rebaptized.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. It's a big thing in our church, rebaptism.
Mm-hmm. Yes, especially since, they talk about when you get baptized that there's one baptism, right?
Uh-huh.
So it's a little odd.
Well, they came back.
Yes.
Wow.
So my
So
mom like was always kind of faithful, but they weren't like going to the church kind of thing. But for my dad, he talks about how his second conversion he feels like was more of a thing. But I've never really asked him about it now, so I'll have to pick his brain about it.
yeah. That's so they're getting met because you kids are just horrible, terrible kids. So they're and then they can't afford full 10% and they get kicked out. Man, that's a story right there already. Wow. So you're a Kingdom kid, and what was it like in the beginning? Like, what are your first memories? Or here, the question I like is like, how did you view God as a kid? What do you remember God being in your head?
So I think for me, he was, this word sounds harsh, but like the judge.
Uh,
Um, he had done this really amazing thing for us, and we were there to pay back a debt, and that's what our life was. And I that's kind of how I saw him and Christianity as a young person.
Pay back a debt. Wow, I could see that. Hmm.
So,
Cool.
like us spending our lives living the right way, and then God ultimately deciding whether or not we had done that the best way we could or up to his standard or whatever.
Mhm. It seems like a big theme for us. God is something like a judge or ruling over us, or that view of like paying back a debt. That's a big thing because I know I've felt that sometimes, and you can hear that from other people, even other churches, that it's like our life from the very beginning. We know that there's something that we've done. We don't know what it is, but we owe this thing, this God something.
Well, and just
Um,
kind of the way, you grow up hearing these conversion stories, right? Where people get
mm,
up and share and they're like, there was this loneliness I felt, or this pit that I felt like I needed. So as a young person, you think, okay, I'm going to develop this, or I should feel that, right? And the only thing that's going to make me feel right is God or having a relationship with God. So I
mm,
think as a young person, it's like, okay, am I having those feelings? Should I have those feelings? I mean, I'm obviously not going to be like, I remember hearing these stories from people coming outside the church, like, I was laying in a ditch and I had done all these drugs and I knew I needed God. But like for us, being raised in the church, I felt like this is such a selfish way to think about it, but like we were robbed of an experience like that, right? So we just had to love God. And I remember sitting in a Bible study once and being like, I almost want to have one of those experiences like someone else, because then I feel like I would really crave God the way maybe someone who wasn't raised in the church would. And I will never forget this. The person studying the Bible with me looked at me and said, Jesus was a kingdom kid. And so why are you having such a hard time with this? And I remember thinking, okay, funny that you mentioned that Jesus was a kingdom kid, right? Because that's like so comical to think about, because we don't really think about it that way, right?
oh, that's going in the description of our conversation when I post this. Jesus was a kid, but he was a product of the Jewish society. Yeah.
Right. So, and just my dad has done such a good job of teaching me who Jesus was after the fact. But like what's so interesting is Jesus was a kingdom kid, right? But who
Yeah.
was he? He was like countercultural. He was constantly bringing the people of the time to a place of like, I love you so much, or God loves you so much that I am going to feed the 5,000, or I'm not going to throw the first stone, or I'm not
Mhm.
going to do these things. But that is not the way Jesus was necessarily portrayed. And maybe it was just the way I was listening to lessons, but I almost thought about it like God was judging me versus like with the overflow of how much God loves me, I want to live my life a certain way,
Mhm.
which I honestly feel like if you were as a teacher, the theme of the gospels is love,
Mhm.
not
Yeah.
like, oh, but I think for me, like you're saying, it was more of like a judgment kind of thing. And then trying to get my life to line up in um, in the parameters of the Bible or what
Mm.
people expected.
It's like that thing. I mean, yeah, God loves us, but really, he's judging us. So, like, if that's what you get, like, I feel like that's was a lot of the sermons that I would listen to would be like, yeah, sure, God loves you, but understand you're a dirty, rotten sinner. And it's
Give me
like,
your faith without deeds.
yeah, but like as a kingdom kid and being like, for us, it's like, what else? We didn't know any of that stuff,
Right.
you know? And it's like, well, what if I mean, do I need to start? It's just funny because I think I thought that too at some point. Do I need to go do some things to really get this? You know?
Like someone
I-
like praying for some trauma to like want Jesus is a little bit like, really?
yeah.
But I was so envious of that, like these people's desire or need for God when it wasn't that I didn't think I needed God, but I just thirsted for that kind of like yearning for God.
Mhm. Yeah, because we were kind of put into this society already,
Exactly.
you know, and all these other people just had to go through all this. Apparently, it was just death and destruction outside the
Right.
doors.
Drugs, sex, and unfulfilling relationships.
Yep. Drugs, sex, unfulfilling relationships, and friends that aren't going to be friends with you. They're not going to be real
Exactly.
with you. They're not going to care about you. You're never gonna have any money.
Right.
Uh, what else? Just insert horrible thing, and that is what life is without our church.
Mhm.
So it did a real good job of making me never want to leave.
Right. Don't you
Yeah,
dare.
yeah, don't leave. So yeah, so in the beginning, I mean, was it good? What are some positive things that you remember like as a kid about church?
I mean, I loved Kingdom Kids. Loved it. So that part of
Really?
things was good. I felt like the church in Jacksonville was very family oriented. We spent a lot of time in the build, like just being raised like in the synagogues or the gallery. I have a lot of really great memories. Uh, and again,
Mhm.
like I know you and I have talked about this, but my best friend to this day is a relationship I built in Kingdom Kids. So I feel like friendships have been so good. Just like always hanging out with people. Like I
Yeah.
feel like when I think about our childhood, it's just like we were always with people. And
Hmm.
as I've gotten older, I notice that not everybody has that like village built into their life. So
Hmm.
I think that part was really good. And then moving into the teens, like literally just having events all the time was so exciting socially.
Cool. Yeah, and you you're a different generation than me because I'm glad that you brought up the teens and you're younger than me. And what the teens I think was different for you than it was for me. Because you were in the teens after the letter, right?
Mhm. So I, let's see, in eighth grade, I started and I hadn't heard the word character, like the phrase character studies until I was listening to the podcast. I'm like, okay, that like a bookmark in time, like reminded me, okay. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh gosh, I just want to get to the real studies. I had studied, gotten to the real studies in the summer before my freshman year.
Hmm.
So I had gotten past the kingdom study and was finally allowed to like go to sector and Friday devotional and could start hanging out with a lot of people who I wasn't really allowed to hang out with before because I wasn't serious enough in my studies. And then I was asked at that point to kind of stop hanging out with the best friend I was just talking to because she was a non-believer at the time, even though, she was in the
Wow.
church or whatever. Um, but I got baptized in September. And when I got baptized, that's when they really had told me that I need to back off from my relationships with Kingdom Kids that weren't disciples. And then the letter came out in November, I think, right? Of
Hmm.
2002. Yeah.
Yeah. 2003, something like that.
Yeah. So September of my freshman year, and then right after that is when the letter came out.
So that was really had to have been intense before. You have this best friend who's a part of the church and they're telling you not to be around them.
Mhm. So in my studies, um, they had talked to me about not hanging out with my two best friends who I had grown up with. So that was a tough call. But then I feel like I actually don't know how they felt about it. I mean, now talking to her about it, she's like, yeah, you kind of like backed off from us for a while. But then things picked up once she was baptized in January, so it wasn't that long. But then at the same time, the other thing they talked to me about in my studies was I played soccer all growing up. And I was asked in my studies to not play for the high school team because it would have been too much time with non-believers. And that was just something they felt like wasn't fitting for a disciple. So if I wanted to do this seriously, those were the two things I really needed to like count the cost with.
And so you gave up soccer too?
Yeah, I mean, I played like just rec soccer, which they felt like was fine because it was like once a week or whatever. Um, but joining the high school team would have meant, just attending, being with that team, being with those people so often, and then also possibly missing midweek or church on the weekends, which was like a big no.
Don't miss the midweeks. Oh God. So like I wish that I was surprised by saying that, by you saying that. I wish that all of this was like, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. It's probably how desensitized I am from like all these stories that I'm hearing, but it still never takes away it's just audacious. And like what a thing to ask kids to do.
Mhm.
to stop. And especially if it's like someone who's at the church. And I assume your friend wasn't like trying to get you to do all these bad things,
No, nope, in fact, she was studying the Bible too.
but she was probably on study 2 and you were on study 6, and you need to be around people that are study 6.
Literally, I feel like and I don't know if in my mind, it's the kingdom study was the one that once you got past
Mhm.
there, you were serious enough. So there was just like this delineation between people and their studies. Now, people that were doing their character studies, okay, small talk, right? Like you're not really even studying the Bible.
Well, I want to pause for a second. What are I don't remember the character studies.
So the
What
way
are those?
the way they explained it to me was just like, before we start into these like official studies, like the word discipleship, and
Mhm.
then wow, I can't believe I'm remembering this so clearly in the kingdom study. Um,
Sin of
they
repentance,
felt
light
like
and dark, counting
right, right,
cost,
right.
all
And
that
like
same
counting the
thing. Yeah,
cost. Oh, I love the domination study. And people would take notes. Okay, that's not what you asked. I'll come back to that. But
it's okay. Yeah, fine. Sorry.
the character studies, they said, well, let's just take time to work on your character, right? Because you're really selfish and prideful and very, all these things that aren't befitting of like a disciple. So
Why are
let's
we always selfish? You're like the 14th person that says, like, when they're in high school, they're getting called out for being selfish. We were also selfish kids. What in the world?
honestly, I really didn't think anything of it. I was like, okay, sure. So I just remember every week us having to sit down, and it was like another part of my character that they had decided wasn't like good enough yet for me to be able
Oh.
to start what I thought like were the real studies.
See, they didn't have the character studies when I was in the teens. It was just
Well,
you just started studying.
okay. And like, so the thing about character studies also is like, unlike the ones that we were just talking about, those were somewhat scripted, right? Character studies were just like, hey, let's open the Bible and talk about your selfish nature, or let's open the Bible and talk about your pride, or talk about your, hey, I saw what you were doing last week at church, and now we're going to talk about it. Like, it's basically like having a discipling partner, but like before you were a disciple, and you're like, wow, do these people like, do they just open the Bible and like on the fly decide something, or are they watching you and then they're like, okay, that's what we're going to talk to her about in our studies?
And it's almost like you should have like seen if people were really listening and like said something weird to just someone. It's like when you test to see if your phone is listening, because you talk about bagels and then like the first thing you open up on Instagram is like a bagel ad and you're
Yes.
like, whoa.
Yeah,
And
that's true. Yep.
just because see, I would have done something like that. I would have just to see if people were listening, I would have said something just wildly bananas to see if what they would talk about.
I mean, I do think your parents got input too, because I do
Hmm.
remember a few times them bringing up arguments I had with my mom. And I'm like,
Hmm.
I didn't tell you people about that. So, I mean, obviously, that was not my response in the study because, okay, it didn't matter how they found out, right? But
Yep.
that would have been, I guess to me, it was so normal, right? That they had a dialogue with your family or whoever you were hanging out with, and then decided from there what part of your character they needed to address.
So messed up. Character studies. I don't remember even when I led when I was working with the teens, I don't remember doing character studies with teens, but maybe that's because it was like 2006 after the letter. I don't know if things were different. But anyway, but
I
like
mean,
so what made
also,
you
oh,
Oh, go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say, like, one thing that made me very jealous about people who were from the world, God, wow, that phrase,
It went
was that
fast.
they got to
Studies went
jump
fast.
that line,
Yeah.
right? Like they got
Hmm.
to start right with the word study, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Like
You
the
don't have to
rest
do all these. Yeah. What? They got it so easy.
maybe that's where it started for me, and that's why the response was that Jesus was a kingdom kid.
That's right. We should have been out there doing some messed up stuff and then coming back, and then we would have just fast tracked through the studies, and I would have probably had a totally different experience. Wouldn't have taken me 3 times.
That's so again, I just like processing that when you're saying it out loud, like again, thirsting for something traumatic or horrible to have
Yeah.
happened, or for me to have done something that is like, oh, then I can study faster. Oh, then I can be more godly or whatever. It's just, and there was one girl who shared something, and I must have been in middle school, but again, she literally talked about being in a ditch, like waking up from some party, like drunk or something in a
Wow.
ditch. And she was like, that's how I knew I needed God. And I'm sitting in the pew like, yes, I want a story like that. It's like, what? And I actually remember you sharing, did you have some like accident off like Spaghetti Junction or
Yeah.
something?
My car almost went off on one of the ramps.
So you shared about that, and like I guess having some like near death experiences. And I'm like, gosh, this guy's a kingdom kid and he has a story kind of like that. Like, what is going on? Come on, God, I need something scary. But
I
yeah.
know. You should have done what I did and started stepping out, and then God will pull you right back in. Because that was what was happening there. I was stepping out. I didn't want to be at church anymore. And God's like, nope, here's this horrifying accident for you where you almost kill you and your brothers. It was so long ago. I know. It sounds messed up to say stuff like, but that's just, that's in your head. I get why you think that. But yeah, they did seem it was always so much easier on I always felt it was easier for everybody else than me. They
Mhm.
were harder on us. They had to make sure that you knew what you had because you could have been born in this family. You could have been born in that family.
Mhm.
Look at that guy, that neighbor that you have down the street. Well, that guy doesn't love his kids. You're lucky to have you're lucky to have this dad who loves you. It was just some kind of narrative like that we were like fed, right?
And especially like, it's funny that you brought up like we were all selfish, right? Like we know as people who teach children,
Uh-huh.
your like brain is actually not like it is, that is how your brain is, like that is
Yeah.
appropriate development for things to be
Yes.
about you. That's
Mm-hmm.
healthy, right? But for
100%.
other people to be telling you that you're like constantly selfish, it's, I think, just like one of the examples where we were asked to do things our bodies were maybe like physically or developmentally like ready for, and
What do
then
you
like
mean?
shamed when we didn't like respond appropriately.
What do
um
you mean by that? Like what you dressed, how we dressed, stuff like that?
just like again, like the being selfish, or just some of the things that you've talked about with like sexual purity, or
Mhm.
just really having, I remember my parents getting on to me so much about my haughty eyes, and like reading scriptures to me about that, and talking to me about like how I mean, God, that's just
Stop it.
sends chills up my
Stop it. Haughty eyes. Not haughty eyes. Like stop looking with those hot, like trying to show off your hot eyes. Like haughty, like Haughty.
Yes, and so my parents talking to me about like reading me scriptures and talking about just being respectful with my body, like when they were talking to me, but there being absolutely no room for like what was developmentally appropriate for that age, right? Like a
Yeah.
child rolling their eyes and really not understanding, like like I know as a teacher sometimes I have to like physically like show a child like this is what your face looks like when you're talking to me, but there wasn't a lot of room for stuff like that
Hmm.
in the way that they disciplined. And I mean there's good and bad things with that, right? But
Hmm.
the feedback they got as parents was just, it didn't allow for us to be very human very often. And
Yeah.
I think that's what I mean by like developmentally appropriate or whatever.
Well, I did. I just Googled the definition for haughty, and because I think some of us, no one past 1875 has used that word. And so haughty is arrogantly superior or disdainful. Someone who is haughty is arrogant and full of pride. When you're haughty, and I have to say it right because it's pronouncing, when you're haughty, you have a big attitude and act like you're better than other people. A
Mm.
haughty person acts superior and looks down on others. Haughty people are disdainful, overbearing, prideful, swaggering. Swaggering. All right, Annabelle.
Wow.
and obnoxious. So it looks like
Obnoxious.
so uh,
Did your
wow.
parents ever say that to you? I mean, it was a girl thing. I always got in trouble for my haughty eyes, like my response to that.
Well, I think no. One time my mom did call my brothers and I tramps because not because of it. Like she meant tramp, like, the guys riding the rails,
Oh,
like a
yeah.
tramp, because of the room we were in was disgusting and there was clothes and food everywhere. And I said, Mom, you just called us a prostitute. And she was like, What? Anyway, but I've never been called a haughty. And but I guess when you think about that, like they always told us that whatever we were doing, we were being selfish or prideful. And
Mhm,
we were just like, I don't understand. And like we were being kids,
mhm,
like kids have no understanding of the world around them. They just know themselves. They know the here and now, they know what's right in front of them.
mhm,
And it's our, and and in essence, it is our job to kind of help them find, see that. But like it was never done in a way that I think was appropriate. It just made us feel shitty about ourselves
mhm,
and like shameful and guilt. And then like that led to not trusting ourselves.
mhm.
At least for me, I don't know if that was for you.
I've seen it come out a lot professionally. Um, I never, and this is my own shit, and I know that,
Mhm.
but I do think it started very young that I never feel like I deserve to be any room that I'm in, like professionally, even though I have earned the right to be there. I know what I'm talking about. I am good at my job. I am damn good at my job.
Yeah.
But
I was only laughing because I feel the exact same way.
right, like I've always been so envious of kids or adults that just have a confidence. Like
Mhm.
I feel like you can always rail that, you can always rein it back. You can teach humility, you can teach empathy, you can teach those things. But I feel like I never had that kind of confidence because anytime that I did have it as a young person, it was seen as like sinful. And
Mhm.
so I have a really hard time just in general with self-confidence, but definitely professionally.
Yeah, I was talking about that with someone in the last episode about whenever someone says something nice about me, I assume they're talking about the person behind me. They're not you don't you're not talking about me because I don't deserve any of that.
Right.
And those kind of things. It was learned through the church. I mean, that is also my own shit too. Like we all care, but I mean, we all have our own baggage, but it definitely, the church didn't help that. It kind of added more baggage for it.
Well, it's definitely like so when I was talking to my brothers about coming on this podcast, one of my brothers, we were talking about different practices in the church that we were talking to one of my sister-in-laws about it. And one of my
Hmm.
brothers goes, what was that thing, that ring of fire? And I'm like, I am sorry, I am not familiar with what you're speaking about. And my baby brother Holden goes, do you mean the ring of honor? And we all started
The Ring of
what are
Honor.
you talking about? But it's like you lived to be brought up in the Ring of Honor or anything like that. But it's so interesting because even when someone was talking about it, about you or praising you in this way, you're already thinking, okay, I don't deserve this, or it just created a lot of imposter syndrome in me.
Mhm.
Like I want to be this, but then anytime someone acknowledged it, I don't want to enjoy it too much because that's also sinful and not, like God, I should be humble. I should. And I
Mhm.
think in my mind, I'll never forget this. My boss said this to me a couple years ago. She said, humility does not mean you're a doormat, Annabelle. And I think I just always thought, oh, humility means like I don't ever acknowledge I've done anything right. I think that was the way I took that growing up.
Mhm.
And so that was me being more Christ-like, was just, no, 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 I don't deserve, I don't like, even if you are just stating something I have done or been good with or whatever, I just never felt like it was okay to sit in that.
Mhm. 100%. I think that it's like it was almost like you could feel good about it for like 5 seconds.
Hmm.
But then after those 5 seconds, you need to understand one, A, you're still a sinner. You're still a piece of crap. You still have a debt to pay. And the person that's probably giving you that compliment's probably a leader and they probably deserve it more than you do. So you need to find a way to praise them too,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know. But I will say though, like for the Ring of Honor is that thing we did at camp, at our summer camp where we,
Hmm.
for those of you, I don't know if I've ever really 100% talked about it. I mean, I think I've done a bunch of these now, but I don't know if we've really ever talked about the Ring of Honor. But the Ring of Honor was, we'd all sit in a circle, and one person. It always started with the guys. It was Sonny, and the women it was Carolyn, and then they would bring one person up. Which, if you got brought up by them, see,
Right.
that was. I do feel that because one time Sonny brought me up, and
Oh,
it was like,
wow.
oh yeah, I was on cloud nine. I
I'm
was like, oh
sure.
my God, I've done it.
Hmm.
I have done it. But anyway, I digress. But then once that person brought in that person they thought, and it could have been about anything.
Hmm.
At camp, it was like if it was a young boy, like an 8-year-old kid, it would have been like, you shared your Coke with me and it was amazing. And I
Hmm.
really enjoyed it. But you get to the older kids and they would have something really meaningful to say. But then once that person was brought in, then they need to bring in someone else. And for me, it was always very pure.
Yes.
And I loved I've loved it so much that I actually had um this sharing thing that I did, I mean, at my wedding.
Hmm.
It was in my rehearsal where um it was funny because I had all the guys were from the church, and then
Hmm.
my wife had all these people that weren't about it. So they had never had something like that. Some of these people had never been in something where like my wife and I were, publicly sharing our gratitude for people. They were like losing it. They were like, "Oh my God, this is the most beautiful thing ever. Why did you do this? I'm a wreck now."
Hmm.
And it's like, but I loved it. I love the idea of verbally speaking your gratitude to someone or
I,
something.
so all four of my brothers are married, and I will say something about church culture, kind of like what you're saying. I think things like the Ring of Fire, the Ring of Honor,
Uh-huh.
um, taught us how to share deeply and
Hmm.
acknowledge and show gratitude, and how. So for me, and I'm sure this is true for you, I am able to express my gratitude
Hmm.
to people so naturally in relationships. And I know that is something that is rooted in those practices in the
Hmm.
church, right? Because for me,
Yeah.
it's not like, oh, I don't need to write down some long speech. I can see something and notice it and know that it is important to share that. And in
Yeah.
my brother's weddings, it was the same kind of thing. Like our family it was so easy for us to get up and share. And I think that's just part of that church culture that
Hmm.
bled through. And what an amazing gift, right? Like
Yeah.
to be
Hmm.
able to talk like that.
Yeah, I did that a lot when I was teaching. I made sure to like verbally express gratitude or praise to students in like a real way, not just like,
Yeah.
way to go. But I
Mhm.
tried to find the thing because that was what was so cool because when you were in the Ring of Honor, it was like something special between you and this one person,
Mhm.
right? And because a lot of us, I don't think, go through life feeling that anybody cares.
Mhm.
So it's
But like
pretty
the Ring
cool.
of Honor is like, I see you. First of all, I saw what you did
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
it meant something to me, but also like I see you. And that is such a something I feel like Jesus would have done if
Yeah.
that's, so just such an amazing practice. So I agree. It's a very cool thing.
Because we all want to be seen, don't we?
Mhm.
Seen and heard. But we can only like it for about 10 seconds. And then anytime past that, we're being selfish and prideful, and we need to do more character studies.
Agreed.
So I want to go back to like what made you want, do you remember what made you want to get baptized or study the Bible?
So I think I always had it in the back of my head that first of all, like I would have a really horrible life if I didn't.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I say that joking, but I knew that I would have an empty life that wasn't fulfilling if I didn't do this thing, right?
Yeah.
But I think I don't want to take away from falling in love with God because I did. I
Uh-huh.
think for me, there was one summer, my parents bought a pop-up camper and loaned it to the camp. So I was actually able to go to camp as much as I wanted to for free. Um,
Really?
yeah, so because my brothers didn't really want to go as much. So there were the last couple of years I went to camp, I would spend like a month out there as a camper. And one summer, I mean, thinking back on that, that's so amazing. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but it changed my life. And I remember so like just sitting, was it what was the devotional that Sunny would do? Was it the Starlight devotional where we go out to the field
Yep.
and you'd look up at the stars? And then,
Hmm.
also within the week, we'd have the cross study. And I remember sitting there and being like, okay, like God is good. He has got to be so much bigger than I am. And there's got to be something about, I need for this to be real. And I need
Yeah.
to find an emotional connection to this structure that my parents have created our lives around. And
Hmm.
so camp helped me create that like emotional connection to God, I feel like.
Oh yeah. Camp was for a lot of things that I share in therapy still now.
Mhm.
Camp was never camp was the only saving grace for me.
Mhm.
Camp was the only place where it gave me it helped me find my purpose. It helped me find who I am.
Mhm.
Uh and not even like spiritually. I
Absolutely.
just I just never fit in like
Mhm.
normal. Like I was never like super into sports and I was never super into the things that everybody else was. But and like so I was always on the fringes, but for some reason, a guy like me at camp is like a superstar,
Right, right,
you know? And like, because I could be silly and I could have a good time. And I was like, you want to play this? Let's play this. You don't have any rules, whatever. Let's just go
right.
and figure it out. And
Mhm.
like I was being seen and heard by adults at camp, by the leaders at camp. And then like I was able to do that for kids. And I mean it's a very powerful thing. Um, and it was so insulated. It was that bubble for us.
Mhm.
We're out in the woods. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I totally, yeah. It I had some of my most spiritual times, beautiful times, moments with people, walking out in the fields and praying and doing all
Yeah.
that stuff. And but I do have to ask, so your parents loaned the camp a pop-up, right?
Yeah, so for like the workers to stay in or whatever.
Yep, I stayed in that pop-up. Yep. It was me and 5 other guys in that pop-up.
Ooh.
Oh, man, I hope that you guys cleaned that thing.
Yeah, well, I don't know where it is now. But just funny that I hadn't thought about that's why I got to go to camp, for so long. Gosh, Sunny would always do that thing at mail call. Do you remember like Alex, the guy I dated
Yeah.
growing up, he sent me a letter. And I remember it being such a big deal because you got a letter, whatever. But
Uh-huh.
every time Sunny would say my name at mail call, he'd be like, if Annabelle Fender married Tom Bender, she'd be Annabelle Fender Bender. But looks like she's getting a letter from someone else and threw the letter out to me. And it was from the guy I was dating. And it was just such a funny thing. But every single piece of mail I got, he would say that.
Oh, man. Oh, gosh. That's cool. So you had the moment, you had the thing like, okay, no, this is real and I want it.
Mhm. And I feel like I got back. So I got back home after pretty much spending the summer at camp. And do you remember like how you used to be able to go on these trips in the teens to like other churches? Gosh, I haven't thought about this in forever.
Yeah.
Like we went to Charlotte, like, and we just went
Yep.
and stayed there for a few
Yep.
days with the church. And
Hmm.
you would go on dates. I mean, I didn't get to do that because I was not disciple yet, but I got to go because I guess I don't know why they let me go actually. Oh, because I had passed whatever study I needed to pass.
Yeah.
And
And you fixed your haughty eyes.
right. And I remember the lady that led the teens in the East, she had taken, it was her and her husband that had brought us to Charlotte. And
Hmm.
I remember her calling the Kleins to like get the go ahead. And so I guess they were like, oh, she's good to go. She can go to the next study. And for whatever reason, that trip is like where all of a sudden I was allowed to start doing a bunch of stuff. I do
Yeah.
remember that. So it ironically, like I don't remember any kind of, I mean, I've thought about now I do. I had actually had my moment with like the crucifixion at camp. That's where I really felt like the emotional response to the cross. That's where I found myself wanting God. But I remember sitting in the cross study and the boys were playing a game of football. And I don't know why anyone thought it was a good idea for me to have my cross study in the bleachers of this game, but that's what was going on at the time. And like thinking about that, that's so wild, right? And I'll never forget one of the girls that was studying with me, like she put her hand on my shoulder and she's like, you don't get it yet, but it's just gonna come over you and you're gonna get it. You're gonna get the cross. And it's for me, it just like hit me in the shower one night and I bawled my eyes out, and it's gonna happen for you, but you can't get it while you're sitting here. I was like, okay. And so
You
I do
can't
remember
get
them
her.
coming to me at the end of the trip and they're like, tell us how you feel. And I mean, I wasn't dumb. So I knew I needed to have like an intense, I don't think they were necessarily looking for emotion at that point. Also, I think I did tear up in my study anyways, because that's kind of just who I was. But I do remember having to somewhat prove that the study had made a difference. And I remember in my mind thinking, I channeled what I had experienced at camp
Mhm.
because what had happened on that trip, it's not that it didn't do anything for me, but it wasn't as important to me, but it was seen as somewhat like of a test. And I guess I
Yeah,
passed
because
it because when I got home, I got to go to the next part of things.
the whole outward sign, they
Mhm.
were always looking for that. Hmm. God, yeah. I remember I got asked to go on I got to go to Columbia, South Carolina
Okay.
when I think I had done the appropriate amount of studies and they felt like I could go to it. So yeah, I remember doing that too. Um, God, it makes my skin crawl that the way that she said that. I don't know
Oh,
why,
like
but
not getting it.
yeah, as you were saying that, I was just like, oh, God, it's just like such a like, oh, because of course, I mean, you got it. You understood. It's not like because we heard the cross all the time,
Right.
which is different nowadays because I've been to a lot of churches um since I've left, and they don't always do any kind of like because we did communion every Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of churches do that,
And
especially like sometimes it's like once a month, I think, is when they do it.
right. And so it's so, gosh, thinking about communion, there were so many Sundays as a disciple. I remember passing the plate and not taking communion because I didn't want to eat and drink judgment on myself. Like I felt like what I had done that week or whatever just
Mhm.
I wasn't godly enough. And so I didn't deserve communion and I wish I could like recite the scripture. I know that one part just about not eating and drinking judgment on yourself. And if the guy I had dated and I had messed up in our purity, or if something had happened with my parents, or I just felt particularly like I had fallen short of God that week, I remember just very like, and I tried to be really discreet about it because I didn't want to have to really like talk about why I wasn't taking it,
Yeah.
because it wasn't like a legitimate, almost like fear, honestly, that I
Mhm.
didn't want to make things worse with God because I had made bad choices that week. But
Yeah. I've done that plenty of times. I didn't feel like I should do it. Um, I used to, when I would journal, when I would use like when I would talk about like I want to do something, or like I'm feeling this, I would never do uppercase I always did the lowercase I,
yeah. Ugh.
because I felt like that was my way of being humble.
Mm,
That was my way of showing humility.
mhm.
It's like I don't even deserve I don't it's so stupid. I don't deserve an uppercase I when referring to myself.
You don't even deserve to be like correct with your grammar.
I know. Us as
But it's
teachers, we'd be like, you need to come on. Okay, I get it, but you need to have an uppercase I. It's
right,
just
right.
grammatically correct. Come on, guy. But yeah, that judgment, we really were good at throwing that all over us.
But I mean, I do think, like you're saying, like the cross was such a normal part of our Sunday
Yeah.
worship. And then
Hmm.
obviously, I think, Sunny did a really cool, like, job of going through the medical things that happened during the cross, which, I just feel like we know a lot about I was actually talking to someone yesterday and they were like, did you know that Romans used to crucify people other than Jesus? I was like, I actually do know
Yep.
that. I know a lot about that.
Thanks for mentioning something that triggered me. So I'm going to need a minute. I'm going to have to go. I'm going to have to go for a second because I can't. I'm just getting overwhelmed right now. Yeah, but it was such a part of us. And so yeah, you got it. You knew it. Like you sat through it all the time. You learned why when he pierced his side, it was blood and water, because this is
Mhm,
what probably happened. And
mhm,
they made sure we tell people it wasn't in his hand, because his hand would just rip through, and they did it
mhm.
through his wrist because the two bones. Like we know way more stuff than I think that we should have known, right? But
100%.
we not gonna it's just gonna come and it's gonna overwhelm you, and that's when you know. And she probably felt so like but it just like, oh, that makes my skin crawl.
You know what? It's so funny too that you're saying that. I wish they had had TikTok when we were, going through the teens, because I heard someone on the internet the other day saying, these girls that are sharing about church, their voice changes and they tilt their head to the side and their voice gets really soft. And they're like,
Yeah,
you know, God really just, and I was like, oh my gosh, that was me. I did
I know.
that. Like, I just thinking about how my voice even was during Bible studies and how that was different than how I would talk
Yeah.
to friends.
Hmm.
Um, I think a lot of me and the teens in general, and definitely once I got to campus, was my personality was very and is very loud and ironically irreverent.
Uh-huh.
And people in my life asking me to be smaller for God. And that's a hard thing to reconcile, right?
What do you mean by being small? Like,
To be
like,
quieter or to be less or to do things that made other people more comfortable. And I never really thought anything of it at the time. I just thought my natural self just wasn't, it was like unbridled. I remember one time someone talking to me in one of my discipleship or one of my D partners saying, you talk too much and you laugh too much and you need to like rein it in so that other people can have a chance to like be the center of attention or to laugh or to tell jokes. You can't take up all the space. And I remember thinking, I felt so embarrassed. I didn't know how to respond to that.
because what probably happened is someone felt uncomfortable and went to your person to say that, you know?
Right. So like Taya actually brought up, because I was thinking, okay, I'm gonna talk to Roy. I'm trying to think back on some of these times. And I remember you had talked to Chelsea about this, but she was like, do you remember us going to church? We had visited a church in somewhere else, and this woman, I mean, I was still very involved in doing all the right things and dressing the right way. And this woman came up to me. I couldn't have, I mean, I was 18 years old. And she said, "You are making my husband struggle." Um, and I didn't know. She was like, "What you're wearing is making him struggle. And I just wanted to tell you that." And so I looked at Taya and I'm like, I remember her and I were processing that together the other day. And I was like, I just remember being so, like, having so much shame because nothing about my outfit, like now as an adult looking back on that, there was nothing the matter with my outfit.
Yeah.
And here is this grown man who is telling his wife that my body is making him struggle. So I'm keeping him from being close to God. And I'm not sure what she was looking for when she came over and said that to me. But I do remember wanting to leave church, but I felt like we couldn't because it was Sunday and I needed to stay. So we sat in the back until like the last song, and I think we left after that. But I was mortified.
Your friend was with you when that happened?
Mhm.
Yeah. We were my first thought is this might sound harsh, but fuck that shit. Because like it's still an ass backwards way to deal with something.
Mhm.
That is exactly what that was. And it's yeah, I've said it many a times how like if I were to respond to my wife and say that something as if like a teenage girl, like, whoa, look at that. First thing she would be is like not walking up to this random girl and saying, you need to put some clothes on. She'd be like, you need to check yourself.
Right.
That's a freaking high school girl.
But
So
like,
what's
what's
your
the matter with
problem?
you?
But we did like it what like we needed to be whatever the people needed us to be,
Mhm.
right? And like if the personality didn't mesh with what the goal or the mission was, then you needed to stop that.
Mhm.
And you need to dress a certain way. I mean, it's it's the opposite of what it should be, right? Because if we're if we're made and designed by God, the creator of everything, we should celebrate who we are.
Mhm.
First off, you
Right.
know, it's a you know, and I just I hate that that shit happened. It's hard, you know. I mean, I've talked before about my struggles with what it was like with the purity culture being a guy, but it's just like, nah, we got off easy. You guys, yep, talk more about it. Like,
I mean, it's wild because you're raised thinking that your body is this thing that's going to like be the destruction of a man, right? Not
yeah.
anything that should ever be celebrated or loved or have confidence in. It is because any of those things could cause a man to struggle, right?
Mhm.
And then what's even wilder about that is you're like the worst thing that could possibly happen while you're dating is like to have sex, right? Outside of
Yep.
marriage.
Hmm.
But then all of a sudden you get married, and in one day you're supposed to have this, you've been told this thing is so shameful, so shameful, so shameful. And then overnight you're supposed to have this like change of heart. And all of a sudden you're supposed to love sex, and that's what's supposed to be a tenet of your like good marriage. Right.
Hmm.
But like after, and if you're a kingdom kid, for your whole life you've been told that
Yeah.
sex is bad and your body is bad and whatever. And so it's just such an, and then how that played, has played out. I guess my thought about it is like, we spent so much time talking about sexual sin.
Didn't
It,
we though?
and
Didn't
it
we
just,
though?
it's odd, right? Because like there were so many things about being a Christian that we could have been talking about, but that
Yeah.
seemed to take up so many of the devotionals. And you know, before the letter in the teens, you weren't allowed to have a steady boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever. And
In the teens, right?
so when
Yeah.
the guy I started dating, like after the letter came out, the guy I liked was like, we should just date. And we did. And there was a lot of parents.
Wait, that's how it went. I'm sorry. That's how it went.
I mean, he asked me in a really, you know, for those people that are listening and don't know, people don't just like ask people to date in the church, right? It's like a
No,
proposal.
we don't. There's documents that need to be signed. There's at least 4 people that need to sign off on it, you
Well, and
know.
he like, I mean, he was so sweet. He was just doing what like everyone else at the time did. But oh my gosh, he wanted to make it a surprise. So he had told one of my good friends, drive her out to Ackworth Beach. And, you know, I'll be standing there with these roses, whatever. Well, my friend got lost.
Ah,
So the guy likes on the phone with me, trying to be cool, but he's upset, obviously, because he's put so much time and effort into this. And all our friends are in on it. And then he asked me to be his girlfriend. And again, this is not his personality. I don't think that was how he would have liked to have done it, but like that was so how you did things. And him asking me to be his girlfriend was, it was a lot like a proposal. And
yeah, it was.
I
It
was
was.
13 years old, like, or 14 years old.
You were so you had. I'm sorry. It shouldn't be that wild, but for all of us that grew up in it, it was like, no, that never happened.
Right.
Like
So
there's there's
then it
people that were
turned,
kicked out of church for that.
right. So, and a lot of parents didn't, just because the letter came out, didn't actually mean that we should have been allowed to do it. So a lot of people thought that we were sleeping together, and a couple parents called me and were giving me what a very unsolicited, like, hey, we know you're doing this, we know it's wrong. And to like this one
What?
mom had like spread it around that my boyfriend and I had slept together. So my parents actually drove me down to I went and stayed with a good friend in campus for the weekend because my parents just wanted me, they didn't want me to have to go to church that Sunday at our church because so many parents didn't agree with it and thought that we were sleeping together. It was really awful. I haven't thought about
So
that in a
much
long time.
unsolicited adult
Right. Like, can
interactions.
you imagine like me being 14 years old and having to take a phone call from a grown woman who's 45 years old, screaming at me on the phone about how like sexual sin is wrong and us sleeping together is wrong. And I'm sitting there thinking, lady, my boyfriend and I kissed for the first time in our entire lives the other day. And I'm not even sure I kissed him on the mouth. I was so nervous. I probably kissed his cheek or just slobbered on him or something.
We just rubbed our faces together because we didn't know what to do. I'm pretty sure it was the ear. It wasn't even the mouth. But what like and this wasn't just to be clear, this wasn't your boyfriend's mother,
No, just a random mom.
just a random mom who in
Mm-hmm.
her mind was like, I need to tell you this that I know.
Yeah, I think our parents had gotten some advice and basically had told us we weren't allowed to French kiss. And that was all they really said about
Well, I mean, French kiss is basically like second base in our terms.
it. I'm surprised they let us kiss, honestly. I mean, I guess they probably figured, okay, that's what they're gonna do.
But think about like that's so like
Invasive.
it's very invasive. We did sort of gloss. I mean, we talked about how much we talked about like sexual sin, but how much that was like it was on everybody's mind.
Mm-hmm.
We just can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't matter. You had to control this,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Every other sermon for the guys was about masturbation.
Yeah.
And I don't know what y'all talked about, but y'all probably needed to dress a lot better because that's what I feel. I feel like all y'all talked about was the clothes you were wearing and staying skinny, while we talked about not masturbating.
I didn't even know what that was until they asked me to confess it. And I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Mhm.
But yeah, no,
Wow. Yeah.
I remember when our parents, because our parents had to get advice about us dating before we
Mhm.
could date. And my parents told me that it was kind of a mixed bag with people coming back with their advice. And somebody had the consensus was, hey, go ahead and let these two kiss, just don't let them date exclusively. And my parents were like, that's stupid. If she's gonna be kissing someone, she might as well be dating them. But you know
But
what?
it seems like your parents had trust in you,
Mhm.
which it seems like from what you're saying, your parents were very protective of you, had a pretty decent head on their shoulders. Apparently, they couldn't get you in line like they tried to back in Orlando. So
I know
maybe they
my
just
eyes,
gave
my
up
haughty eyes.
your haughty eyes.
I, I mean, now I will say, so some of the stuff about dating that young, I think because nobody else had dated that young, the rules just didn't. What I realize now is they didn't translate well, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
So again, no ill will towards the person I dated. He's a great man. He was a great guy. He was my best friend growing up. And he made a lot of like stupid teenage mistakes. But so for example, I have really bad ADD. I had a 95 Honda Civic and I used to let that thing leave the lights on that thing and kill my battery all the time. Like it was ridiculous. And I
Yeah.
remember getting off this shift of waiting tables one night and calling my boyfriend at the time and saying, "Oh my gosh, I killed my car battery. Can you come jump my car?" And him and his buddies, we were all disciples at the time. They were playing Halo. And so he said, "No, I'm not coming." And I didn't know what to do because again, this is my boyfriend. So
Yeah.
I called my best guy friend at the time, who I didn't know was with my boyfriend. And I said, "Hey," he was really good with cars. He worked in a mechanic shop. And I called and I said, "Hey, is there any way you can come jump my car? I really need some help." So he gets up from the Halo party and comes and jumps my car. And so my boyfriend and I at the time get in this huge argument. And it was such an out of body experience because what ended up happening was I embarrassed my boyfriend by asking another man to jump my car. And
Yeah.
so my
Hmm.
parents made me go back and apologize to my boyfriend for making him feel like not a man, for embarrassing him in this room of disciples. And like looking back on, there was
What?
never a conversation about why he didn't come jump my car. And there was well, so when we dated, a lot of things played out like that. Like I had to apologize when looking back, like I'm not saying I never did anything wrong. I definitely did my fair share of like, messing.
Sure.
But the conversation was usually about me apologizing to him.
And we got the benefit of everything. We as in men. I will always say that. In this culture, in this system, we are gonna make out like I don't know, make out like bandits. Is that the word? Is that the
Yes, it's the
phrase?
saying. Yeah.
Yes, that's the saying. We're gonna make out like bandits because what happened in this scenario is he should have been the one apologizing to you. At no point should you have had to go and apologize because you embarrassed. He's embarrassed because he was stupid.
Right.
He did a stupid thing.
And we were, kids, and it was just, again, being selfish, whatever. But again, the conversation was never about the selfishness. It was what I had done embarrassed him, and I was an extension of him because we were dating.
Mhm.
And so I needed to apologize.
Yeah, it's yeah, but I think it comes back to like how the adults getting into something like that and like with that instance reminds me of what you said with the woman with, you know, giving you unsolicited advice about, because she knew you were quote unquote, she knew y'all were having sex. And like that's not appropriate. there's a way to talk about that. Be like, are you
Right.
sure you want to date somebody? I mean, you're 13, you're 14. Are
Hmm.
you really like that's the kind of conversation you need to be having.
Hmm.
And then when it comes to like back to the clothes, it's like, well, how like I don't know how you would address that, but that's not the way.
Right. If there's this network of people that talk to you anyways, go tell my discipler and she would have come and talked to me about it.
Yeah. Like it's crazy. So oh, but it comes back to that. I think it comes back to that, like, we're just really good at making you feel small,
Hmm.
you know? But wow, so like you just like the teens were just it was so different
Hmm.
because you were going through it after the letter. And it's interesting to hear that perspective because, it was just you would have like there was someone who was on who got, I mean, they were basically like ostracized for dating in the
Right.
church
And
when
they
they were teens.
actually, so he actually lived in my neighborhood. So I remember watching that from a distance, the
Uh-huh.
neighborhood I grew up in, and thinking a lot of things about that. And then finally feeling like it was so different after the letter that my boyfriend and I got to do that. But a lot of spaces that we were in, people thought we were married. Because we
Really?
got married so young. And again, nobody dated at that time.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, so we dated. He broke up with me I think like 3 days before prom.
What?
Yeah. He broke up with me and then asked me on a date for that night, which I had to say yes to. Instead of going to
Wow.
prom. Well, my friends went to prom. Um, which again, teenage stuff. Again, so I think the one thing I'll say about dating that young and there not really having been a precedent set for that is we were held to an adult level of like seriousness and maturity, and we were kids. And so the
Yeah.
seriousness that was being asked of us just really, it wasn't fair to him, it wasn't fair
Uh-huh.
to me. And I mean, I never thought about it that way when we were growing up. We grew up as best friends. um I have a special place in my heart for him and I always will. I will always love him. But like I think we were just we had no chance because of the way the church like projected things into our very
Mhm.
baby relationship because we were teenagers.
It's like they projected, like the adults projected their fear and all that crap on us or on you,
Hmm.
you know? So, so yeah, so you stayed in, you
I
went to
did.
campus.
Yes. So my best friend and I decided to go to Georgia State because everyone went to Athens and I was like, I don't want to do that. I want to do something different. And I had really fallen in love with the campus ministry, or I thought, and I don't even know what church was it originally? Was A&E a part of that? Like, what was the group that housed the campus before North River?
So for a while, we were just our own entity.
Oh, okay, just completely. So
It was always what?
where did y'all meet? Because I remember
We
visiting, I
met
can't remember.
we met downtown
Uh-huh.
or in different like either Georgia State's campus or a couple of hotels there, something like that.
Because I remember going
Um,
and meeting, going out there at senior year, and then going to
uh
Fellini's after, and then just loving like the campus ministry and the people that were a part of it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so
But then
we
after the letter though, we had to be we had to kind of have a church kind of host us
okay.
because there
And
wasn't money. I don't think there was money for us to
gotcha.
be like we had a Wednesday, we would have like a Wednesday night still and maybe a Friday activity, but our Sundays had to be with like another church.
And I think we were in campus for like 5 seconds before they turned around and were like, now y'all are part of North River again. And my best friend and I were like, are you kidding? We just left
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
So my parents, when I went to Georgia State, basically took out a map and they were like, you guys are allowed to live in this space, trying
Yeah.
to keep us safe. Because the
Uh-huh.
dorms were like, they backed up to some low income housing, and my parents were like, we can't afford the dorms and we don't want you living there anyways. So we had a very cool experience in Collier Ridge where we lived above, which worked out for my best friend because she ended up marrying a guy that was a brother of someone that lived under us. My boyfriend at the time lived downstairs. We all kind of just like hung out all the time. It was great. But I think for me, I remember being so overwhelmed by how much the campus ministry like demanded of us, like time wise.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And when I expressed how overwhelmed I was, it's so I had never really had a huge, like, I feel like my whole high school experience had really been me loving God. It had been camp. It had been the boyfriend, punctuated by periods of being like, what the hell? But like outside of that, it was all in all good, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But then when we transitioned into campus, our parents got together and made us live with another girl who now has become one of my best friends. But her parents made her live with us. And then we get dumped into this ministry, which we had picked. But when I expressed how overwhelmed I was by, and it's so funny saying this out loud, but having to even like check my email every day because that's how professors, get in touch with you. That I had
Uh-huh.
never, it was just the age where it was my first laptop, brand new email. So learning how to acclimate into college, which my parents were like, if you lose hope, you're coming home. So that was super important to like
Mm-hmm.
keep that up. So for me, kind of the beginning of the end for me, and this was like a couple years, but the thing I remember is the roommate that lived with us that we didn't know super well. She was working on this assignment on her laptop. And I am not sure what happened, but the whole thing got erased, or she couldn't figure it out, or something. And, none of us cursed. None of us really got too offhand. And I remember her slamming her computer down on the floor and being like, what the hell? I can't figure this out. And just bawling her eyes out as we're like getting our stuff ready. Me and my best friend get our stuff ready to walk out the door to go to midweek. And I'm like, we can't leave her like this. Like, we didn't know her that well, but I'm like, we cannot go to church and leave her like this. So my best friend and I stayed home and just tried to like help her with her assignment, which we knew nothing about. So basically we just sat there and we were friends.
Yeah.
And do we got
Uh-oh.
in
Uh-oh.
so
Yeah,
much
you did.
trouble,
Yeah, you
so
did.
much trouble. And so my discipler came over that night and was talking to us about it. And for 6 months in my in my D times, she wanted me to say we were wrong for staying home. And I wouldn't. I was like, I don't feel guilty about the choice we made. Our roommate needed us to stay home with her, but it became such a big thing. And when things would go like wrong, she'd be like, well, this kind of goes back to,
Oh,
you guys
gee.
missing church that
Mm-hmm.
time. And so for me, that's kind of where for the first time in my entire life, because I had been asked to lead so many Bible studies, and I feel like I was really a part of like the in crowd and whatever, everything in high school and then at camp.
Yeah.
And then all
Mm-hmm.
of a sudden I had entered into this space where like I was unspiritual because I had made this choice. And after that, I was seen a different kind of way. And I didn't like that. And
Yeah.
that's kind of where that started.
Now, was the roommate, was she a member of the church?
Oh yeah, she's a disciple.
Did she get in trouble for not going to church?
She didn't care.
She
Like,
didn't
she
care.
definitely got in trouble, but she did not let that bother her. And my best
Really?
friend is so sweet. She's so like, she's such a like people person that like, I think when people were like, you're wrong, she was like, you're right, we were wrong.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't a thing for her.
See, my the way I was programmed I would have done the exact same thing that you would have done. But then when they told me I was wrong, I would immediately been like, yeah, you're wrong. I shouldn't have done that. I can't believe that I did that. Thank you for telling me that I did that. I won't do that again.
Mhm.
Because that's just how they had gotten, they got me with that.
So, and I think I used to be like that, but our senior year of high school, our teen worker, or the people that led the teens at the time, was talking to me and my two best friends, and she sat the three of us down and she goes, I want to be very clear. And she pointed to one of the girls. She's the most like Jesus out of the three of you, not you two. So here we are, three best friends, and she's essentially like pitted us against one another, right? Like this girl is spiritual. Well, little did she know is the friend that she had said was most like Jesus had been smoking weed the day before at school. So I
That's
was
why
like,
she seemed like she was like Jesus. She was so chill. That weed was helping her. That weed was helping her.
and I think after that, I remember thinking, I do everything right. I mean, everything right. And so maybe I had gone into campus with a little chip on my shoulder because I was the way that you were. I would always be like, you know what, I was wrong. I was wrong. And I just remember for the first time in my life after that happened, I was like, you know what? No, it wasn't. And I stick by what I said. And I realized, I mean, now looking back on it, when I started to not be agreeable was when things got really difficult for me
Hmm.
in the campus ministry.
Wow. Stop being agreeable. It's just such a crazy, like, it's such a crazy thing that the things that people got so upset with us about were the things that would be natural for someone to do. Like, you were with a friend and you helped her in a time that she needed, you know? Like, how in the world is that wrong?
Right.
Right?
Like I would praise a student for staying back and helping a friend who needed it. I would be like, that's so kind of you. But that was obviously not the conversation. So
Yeah. Because they automatically assume if we're not there, we're off doing insert whatever horrible thing.
mhm,
And we've given up on the mission. They had to have eyes on us. They had to know we were there. It was like this, like cutting us off from things,
mhm.
you know? Man, that's
So I think
crazy. I mean, like I got in trouble for skipping church, but that's because I went to Dave Matthews Band concert.
yeah,
Like
I
yours
remember
was
listening to you
way
sing.
better than mine, right? Like,
Yeah, so pretty quickly after that, because that would have been, you start in the fall, the
uh-huh.
school. And so that happened, which already kind of put us on a little bit of a list. But again, my best friend, so much more agreeable than I am. She was like, yeah, you're right, we were wrong. The one friend that did it literally did not care. And we went to camp for a campus retreat. And I remember we had met, somebody had invited visitors out. And I started talking to one of the girls because she went to Georgia State too. And the campus leader at the time came out because everyone else was in the dining hall watching a movie, but we were sitting out on the gazebo in the rocking chairs. It was a beautiful night, and we were talking and really getting to know this girl, having a great time. I'm just laughing and
Yeah.
enjoying ourselves. And the campus minister pulled me aside, the woman, and she said, don't you think it's weird that the non-believers just flock to you?
Stop
I
it.
think that speaks to how unspiritual you are, that people are so comfortable being around you who are not following God. And I remember being like, what the fuck?
I have no like damn.
So for
You should
me, after those two experiences, I stayed through things, but after that, it was never the same for me
uh
because I realized very quickly it didn't matter, you know, where I was coming from. I felt like it just felt like I was just never doing enough. I will say I had a lot of really great experiences in campus with the friendships I built. Again, living the apartment complex we lived in, a lot of our friends had very similar, like we were going to campus, we were doing the things, we were loving God, but in a very like tempered way, right? Like most of us were kingdom kids. We had grown up in this and we were living the life. And more than that, too, just like enjoying each other's fellowship and spending time together and loving each other. But outside of that apartment complex and really being in the thick of the campus ministry, I remember several times being asked if I needed to be like rebaptized and if I needed to study the Bible again and some other stuff. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Um,
What?
so
Wow,
it just
man.
it escalated very like quickly from literally what I felt like was nothing.
So then did you just leave, or was it like you just kind of let yourself kind of get pushed away and then you were just like off,
So the
or
irony was like I remember after living so at least freshman year, so I was still pretty heavily involved in church most of the way through college. I would say
Mhm.
my heart wasn't really in things in terms of like the ministry, but I was still going. The guy and I that had dated in high school were, I mean, I think unofficially and officially dating, so he was a big part of my life. Um, I remember being asked to be full-time out at camp, and I remember having to turn it down for some reason for school. So I was still
Mhm.
involved enough in campus that I was like, because I remember Carolyn calling and offering the job to me. And then weirdly, what is the church Northview asking me to come help lead the teen ministry there. They wanted me to interview to do that job in college. And I remember thinking, the church I go to right now thinks I'm such a sinner, and you people are over here asking me to help lead a ministry. I remember looking at I worked for a photographer who goes to that church, and she was like, I think you'd be really good at it. And I remember being like, I don't think North River will like let me, like, I don't think they would recommend me.
I no, I think it goes back to that what you were saying, like all these non-believers flock to you. Like the non-believers flock to Jesus.
It's
Like,
not, I like so the woman that said that to me
so
is
that, but I was saying that because like I would see that as like, oh, that's really awesome what you're doing. Like a person like me is seeing like she's just hanging out with this person, building this relationship. Like that's what needs to happen. Like you're not like, hey, check it out. You want to, I got a like gallon of hooch. You want to go back behind the dining hall and go drink it while ever these losers are watching a movie. Like I'm pretty sure that's not what you were doing, right?
no, we're not at all. We're just getting to know her, the
Yeah. And so
people.
like, but that's the thing that people, because people want to be seen, people want to be heard. And I think that's what people crave. And like like I would see that and be like, that's awesome. Way to go. Right on. Like the movie probably sucked too, so we're out here just and this person feels comfortable talking to you. I think the right people see stuff like that and they're like they can see the heart of the person,
Right.
right? Person that saw she was just probably trying to get you in line,
Hmm.
you know? Because but that was how but we got each other in line by making you feel like crap,
Hmm.
you know.
And I know, listening to this podcast, I've thought, I know there's at least two people I studied the Bible with who were kingdom kids that I know I was that person to them. And I have since gone back and tried to apologize. And I know it's a little too late. And we were all just part of something. We were all just doing our part, right? Things that
Mhm.
we thought that was like loving someone, but just the damage that it did to people. And I remember
Mhm.
with these two girls, for me, I had to talk to them about their clothes. And because I was asked to talk to them about their clothes. I was such a jerk about it to one girl. I remember being like, we were at some movie night, and I'm like, aren't you a little cold? Instead of just saying, hey, your shorts are a little too short for what's going on, and pulling her aside and saying that I didn't do it like that. I made her feel bad. And I remember saying, aren't you a little cold in that outfit? Don't you feel like you need to put some more clothes on? I'm like, what a bitchy thing to say to someone, right? So unkind and
Mhm.
ungodly, because I feel like Jesus would have been like someone that's like, hey, because the truth is when someone what people don't think about, and I think about this if I ever, like, I think about this with students. If someone has an outfit on, there is literally nothing they can do to change the outfit in that moment.
Yep.
So if it's something someone cannot change, is there a point in talking to them about it when they can't do anything about it? Or do you wait to where you can't, where they have an opportunity to change their clothes and then you talk to them about it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because then they don't have to spend the whole time feeling like, oh my gosh, now I'm so embarrassed. Like kind of like me at the church with that man. Like,
Yeah.
I don't have an outfit here to change into. But anyways, I was just kind of thinking, I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
play this like only victim card. Like I definitely know I was a part of that system too. And I hate that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I could go back and do it again, just like other people, they would do
Yeah.
it differently too.
Well, none of us get out of this clean.
Right.
None of us. We're all have done or said or got caught up in a system. That's just what happens
Mhm.
in systems like this, especially if you're in something from the time you're in it till when you got out. I mean, that's 20 something
Yeah, so I would
years.
say like I officially left when I left for grad school. So
Uh-huh.
probably like I remember getting a little bit talked to about my 21st birthday, and that was probably they were right to do that because I definitely got drunk. But
Yeah.
yeah, I was probably about 20, 22, 21. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, what was they were talking about what you just talked about on Instagram about can the person change right now?
Mm.
Is it worth talking about? It
Hmm.
was like a teacher Instagram.
Oh, was
It got,
it? Oh,
I think
cool.
so. Something got sent to me and it was the exact same thing.
Hmm.
It was along the same lines because really, like, I mean, yeah, if they can't do anything about it, you're only going to pile on shame, guilt, and, pain, you know, and like public correcting never works.
Right.
Like when I was in a classroom, if I ever like spoke to a student from like across the room, it
Hmm.
never did what I intended it to do,
Right. You're
you
engaging
know?
in a power struggle that Sonny
Yep.
used to say that about counseling. I don't know if you remember that. He'd be like, never engage in a power struggle with a kid. And I use that in my teaching all the time. Do
Mhm.
not put yourself in a situation where the other person is a wild card, right? But I do think the way we were raised, we weren't, when people were shaming us, we actually weren't wild cards, right? Because they had conditioned us to respond certain ways. But occasionally when someone did
Yeah.
respond in not the way they thought, that's when it was like, oh, problematic and whatever else.
I have I mean, even as a teacher, I've done that. And it was one time I this kid was eating chips after we got back from lunch.
Uh-huh.
And I've had a rule. I don't know if I've ever shared this. I'm gonna share it anyway because it talks about it. But I had a rule that like when you don't eat in the classroom, if you have like chips, you have something you haven't finished, put in your book bag, don't bring it into the classroom.
Okay.
And I've had it. I had a day, as we all do as a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm talking. I'm getting back, trying to get the kids back into class, and they're not. They're hooting and hollering and being fourth graders. And I get them down. I'm trying to tell them, and this kid is just like eating his chips, right? While I'm talking, and I snapped and I ran over to his desk and I grabbed his chips and I crushed them in his face, right? And then I walked over and I slammed him in the trash can.
Was everyone like, oh,
Yeah. And I just remember that kid ran out of my classroom
oh.
screaming. He ran up to the office and the parents, all not the parents, all the kids were like you could have heard a pin drop. They were like, what just happened? Because I mean, anytime that I would raise my voice or exert any kind of force, I'm
Mhm.
scary to a kid because I'm 6'1". I'm
Yeah.
like two something. I'm a giant to any of these 9-year-olds, right?
Hmm. Well, and I think
Remember
too, like at least for me, and it sounds like you're pretty similar, when your normal isn't to raise your voice, when you change like
yeah.
that, the kids
Hmm.
are like, oh crap, he is serious.
Yeah, I just remember the kid ran out, he slammed the door, and I went looking and I saw him run to the office. I shut the door. I like walked back in the classroom, I shut it quietly, and I go, yeah, guys, I overreacted right there. I said it just like that. Um, and then I called the office and I talked to the kid. I cleaned it all up. It was great. I even bought him another bag of
Oh,
chips.
that was nice.
Yeah, because I was like, I was a dick. That was stupid. But and these kids, I was like, I just remember telling the kids, like, you know why I did that, right? And some kids like, yeah, because he was eating and he tells us not to eat. It's like, yeah, but shouldn't have done that. I apologize to all of you. Because it was like it was a big deal. But what I say that story to say, like, if I had taken a kid, say, hey man, let me talk to you outside real quick, and
Mhm.
said, what's my rule? Like it would have been fine. I would have had nothing to clean up. But yeah, it's my favorite story to tell teaching.
I mean, it's a good one. We all have stories like that as a teacher.
Yeah. But that's what they thought. It's like we would be like excommunicated, from church. We would be,
Mhm.
it's this the public like shaming. Like there was a guy on a few episodes ago where he was publicly shamed for a kiss
Oh yeah, yeah.
in front of his whole teen ministry and stuff
Oh
like
right.
that.
Listen to well, and
And it
I
was
like that was they say it's like biblical, right? Because that
yeah,
happened to someone in our ministry. He had to go in front of them, and I will never forget this. He had to go stand in front of the adults at midweek and confess that he had been impure to the entire church. And and then he was coming back and telling us about it. And he had said that I guess his discipler had read him some scriptures and said that that was like so, like it was
mhm.
like a next step.
Yeah, you're supposed, I think the way that we translate it, or the way that it's said, is like you pull the person aside. If he
Right.
listens, then you can pull someone else in, and if he doesn't
Mhm.
fix it, then you bring him in front of the church.
Right.
It's something like that.
So I
Mm-mm.
think he was sharing with us because this was a close friend I had grown up with, and he actually had moved somewhere else for college. But basically, the church had told him, "You talked to us about the purity with your girlfriend. You didn't fix it." They brought in more people to talk to him. He hadn't, and so the next step was that he was brought in front of the church. He had to confess his sins, and so he ended up moving back and finishing college with us. But that's why he left the church that he was in the other space because he just felt like he couldn't look people in the face after having to like confess at a midweek like that.
Or I don't think I could have done that either.
Right.
I would have left too.
Like, wow, that's really aggressive. Okay.
Man, yeah, it is. So what was it like after you left?
So I would say at that point, so none of my brothers got baptized. So my parents were, I think, a little disappointed and they wanted me to find a church home, but were understanding and I was in college, so they were kind of letting me do my thing. I think because I was in graduate school. I was
Mhm.
by myself, so people didn't really know what I was doing. And I was lucky enough to have a best friend who never missed a beat with me. She didn't care that I had left. We stayed exactly the same, which
Yeah.
I think like you would, I mean, you can appreciate what a gift that is.
Hmm.
Because a lot of people lose a lot of friends. But I will never forget because I mean, her and her husband, up until very recently, continued to go to some version of this church.
Hmm.
Um, but I would run across people who we had grown up together. And so, like for her kids' birthdays and different things, I would run into these people, and people would always do the same thing. They would tilt
Going
their
to church
head, and
anywhere?
Hmm?
Do they go? You going to church anywhere?
Right? They would tilt their head and be like, "Are you happy?" And it was like they were looking for me to be unhappy. And when that wasn't my response, they would dig and dig and dig for it. And I think I got more and more okay with that as like a farther removed I was at those events. And some people weren't like that, but the overwhelming majority was. I think I can relate to other people that have said things on this podcast. I really searched for a church home, but couldn't find one because all I could think is, okay, well, you let people live together when they're not married, or you are reading this scripture and saying things this way, but that's not accurate, or you're preaching that you don't have to get all the way baptized, or like fully dunked or whatever, right? And I couldn't reconcile that scripture about being like lukewarm and like spit out. For some reason, really just in my mind, it was like, okay, it's better to do nothing than to do something wrong or halfway. And I
Mhm.
can't, even to this day, I think I would like to find some version of a church, but I wouldn't say like triggered by church or anything like that, but I have a really hard time getting rid of the dialogue that is just constantly playing in my head.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
so
I can relate to that. And when you mean dialogue, like if you're in a church or just like the dialogue every day?
I mean, so I would say because I'm pretty far out from the church now, it's not usually a day-to-day thing. Occasionally things will come up and I'm like, ooh, why do I think that?
Yeah. Hmm.
But I would say it is very true. I think because I am like so hyper aware of everything
Hmm.
happening in a church setting that I am like, I'm just, and I hate this about me, but like so on the most offense because I don't
Hmm.
want to be on the defense. It's like I want to recognize the things that are wrong before someone else can tell me that they're wrong because I have been trained in this way to spot just like, I don't want to use the word blasphemy, but kind of, right? Like
Hmm.
things that
Yeah,
are
yeah,
just
yeah.
what we believed to be wrong about places of worship.
It's interesting you said so you were rather have done nothing than do the wrong thing. That's what you were saying?
Yeah, which makes no sense, right? Because if someone was talking to me, I'd be like, well, don't you want to find some relationship with God or some place to worship? But in my mind, and I think I've lived my whole life like this, that if I'm not going to do it and go to heaven and everything's going to be right, I'd rather do nothing because
Mm,
halfway isn't going to get you to heaven anyways.
that's true. The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Right. And like the road is narrow, right? Like
Yep.
that. And I remember thinking so many times as a Christian in the church we grew up in, it didn't matter that we were all singing and praising God and worshiping because there was still this chance that we could get to judgment day and God could have still said no. That was a very real thing in my head.
Hmm.
Like that song, like uh will he say like well done, good faithful servant, well
Yes.
done.
Uh-huh.
Like that kind of stuff played in my head all the time. And so I've just felt like being a Christian was so much work. I mean, it potentially could be good work, but if you weren't doing it, if you weren't like sold out or all the way in it, what was the point of all this work and faking it if you weren't going to get to heaven anyways? Instead
Jeez.
of like, let me find a way to know God in my own way, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
talk about that. I mean, that work aspect of it, yeesh.
Yeah.
It's like you're always either closer or farther away.
Mhm.
You're never just like in it.
And like Douglas Jacoby did a lesson on that one time. He
He
talked
did?
about that, how your relationship with God is never stagnant. It's always a thing. And he talked about
Wow.
it from a very like biblical perspective, but I think you're right. Like I don't think that's in our heads for no reason. I think that was how things were presented to us.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember the first time that I mean, I still think that like even I still think that I don't do therapy right because there's a right way to do it. You
Hmm.
know, I still think that like when it comes to like my relationships, that there's a right way to do it.
Hmm.
I was even writing and thinking about this the other day, how like I still feel like their eyes on me,
Hmm.
like watching it, and like they're all gonna come out and say, no, you've been doing all of this wrong, by the way.
Hmm.
And it's
Hmm.
not even like a thing, it's just I'm just been doing it all wrong.
Yeah.
And that's something that's like hard to let go of and
Hmm.
hard to because I remember like when the first time I was like I got a nudge. I was listening to some podcast by Rob Bell, and I was like, it led me to the Bible for the first time in like 6 years.
Mm,
And I was like reading it, and then it was like the most stressful thing for me.
mm,
Because I was like, I'm back in this. What does that mean? I've got to do it a certain way. And then like feeling that like pressure. I mean,
right.
it's challenging. That's a hard thing to let go of,
Mm-hmm.
especially how it was for us, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what like, did it prepare, did all of this, did church prepare you for anything? Like, that's what I've been thinking about. Like, did it prepare us for life? All this pressure, all this shame, all this guilt, all these things that they were telling us about. Like,
I think some of the best parts of me are a product of how we were raised.
how
Like,
so?
I think who I am in a friendship and in a relationship is almost all the good parts of me of that
Hmm.
are products of how we were raised in the church. So
Hmm.
that part of things, yes. Now, is there some bad that comes with that too? 100%. I think it's very like, I don't know how to say, I think it made me really good in relationships. That's what I'll say. So it prepared me for relationships in life. However, it also did some things where I'm constantly like never feeling like I'm enough in a relationship as well. So that's a really, that burden is also really difficult because that's not healthy either, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I think that the church and our ability, because of how we studied the Bible, I think because of how we were constantly talked to about our personalities and being better, I think trained me to be introspective in a way that really I'm realizing a lot of people don't have. And so it's allowed me to be a very good teacher. And not because like I'm so talented with that, but because I'm constantly coming back to the drawing board and wondering, okay, what could I have done better there? How could I be better here? And it's not weird for me to have conversations with a coach, an academic coach about those things, because that's essentially the relationship that you had with a discipleship partner.
Hmm.
So I'll say that that part of things I think did prepare me for life. Now, I think the bubble that we grew up in and the way we were taught about the world, I think the way we were even taught to see people outside of the church, that part, it set me up. I think I had this idea that best friends outside of the church people of the world could never love me the way that people in the church could or be best friends to me. I could never have any fulfilling relationships, or I think a lot of the reason why I've never been married is in a lot of my relationships, I have this hang up with, okay, this man is supposed to fulfill this very specific leadership role to get us to heaven, which is ironic, right? Because I'm not even living that life. But that is a thing I have to constantly ask myself, okay, but if you're not even like, if that is not the life you're living, why are you worried about that in your dating relationship? And then how do you kind of pivot to something different? So in that aspect, no. And I don't know if that answers your question because it's a little bit of a
Oh, it
yes and a little bit
does.
of a no.
Yeah. It's almost like that last thing you're saying. It's like you have to force yourself to, what is it that you really want?
Mm-hmm.
You know, because we just kind of like, in a lot of ways, did what we were told, said how we thought we should say, instead of like really
Mm-hmm.
living our truth,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, what do you think? We were in a cult.
I have been wondering, oh gosh, the smile on your face. Um, so I have always said no, but after
Mhm.
listening to everyone's stories and looking at the definition of a cult, I think yes.
Mm, okay.
And I don't think it has to be anything. I know this sounds not that they're like good cults, but I think when you're just looking at the definition of a cult, I think that we, in its purest form, do like fulfill whatever minimums there are for that.
Hmm.
So yes.
I've said we're the Diet Coke of cults.
Okay, I love that too. There you go. Something that's a little good, a little bad. Might give you
Yeah.
cancer, might not.
Well, I hope that you can find a way to fix your haughty eyes.
Isn't that the truth? And I hope if I ever have children, I never say that to them.
Well, I hope you do. I hope you tell them that every day.
I
But
hope somebody listening to this podcast is like, my parents said that too.
I mean, I've been making a list. I mean, I've made a list of words that we've used like in our church to
Hmm.
make like a big glossary. I
Oh,
mean,
one,
there's
I was gonna say, I hope you're doing a glossary in the back. Yes,
yeah, because there's a lot of words that we've used. But yeah. Well, thanks for doing this. Thanks for coming on and sharing your story.
I appreciate
Um,
it.
yeah, you're adding to this growing conversation and it's awesome. So, and thank you guys for listening, all your support. And yeah, if you remember the ICOC or the ICC and want to come share your story, you can reach out to me by email at Clemenz with a Z at gmail.com or DM me on Instagram, the Clemenz with a Z Instagram page. Well, yeah, until next time, guys, peace.